So good day, introductory soil science students. So since I can't be with you in person, what I've decided to do is cover the lecture material via sort of a screencast format. And what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about the essential elements, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the soil mineralogical properties, and in particular the colloids that we find in the soil environment. And I've broken this series of presentations into 5 groups basically, and each of the presentations that I'm going to cover is going to last about 5 to 10 minutes. So in the first set, we'll talk about the criteria that makes a plant essential nutrient a plant essential nutrient, and the cations and the forms that they exist in as cations or anions. The second one will be a discussion of nutrient availability versus pH, which is an awesome relationship. The third one will deal with fertilizer nutrients and some environmental problems associated with 2 of those fertilizer nutrients. Stay tuned for which 2 they are. The fourth one will deal with soil health and the relationship between soil health and human health, which is a pretty cool and awesome relationship. And then the last one will deal with the tiniest particles that we find in soils called colloids. So this first discussion is just going to talk about the criteria that makes a plant essential nutrient plant essential, and then the cations and anions. And associated with this presentation will be a polylearn quiz that will have about 5 questions associated with it, and there will be 1 quiz for every slide set that I cover, so that'll be 5 basically. So this first slide set, we're just going to talk about this first objective right here, be able to list the 18 plant essential nutrients and also know the criteria for their essentiality, and then this one right here up to the end of the first sentence right there. Okay, give an essential element, be able to write the form that it exists in, and we'll talk about what that means in just a minute. So if we talk about, first of all, where our plant essential nutrients exist, I think you know some of this information already because we covered it before, but here we're looking at granite, and we know that granite is composed of a few different minerals, and those minerals are those different colored components that you find in granite. We got the kind of pinkish, tan-colored potassium feldspar, the black-colored biotite mica, and then the shiny quartz. And each of those minerals has elements associated with them that make them what they are. Quartz is composed of silicon and oxygen. The mica is a potassium aluminosilicate that's got some magnesium in it, and the potassium feldspar is a potassium aluminosilicate. But anyway, some of the elements that are associated with each of those minerals are plant essential, and some are not. So if we go through this generic weathering slide that you've seen before, we know that our parent materials on the left are broken down by weathering processes into smaller components here, and we know then that those are broken down by further weathering processes in the minerals that we find in soils that we find over here. And inside, right, inside those minerals, we have our elements, and some of those elements are plant essential. If we take a look at, a column of soil, and we're just going to say that these kind of black-shaped substances are our soil particles, and this green stuff right there represents our solution, or the water that we find in between the soil particles. We know that our nutrients and our elements are going to be associated with the solid soil particles, and they're also going to be found in the pores associated or dissolved in that water. So if we look at our simple but elegant, and I'd say even beautifully elegant soil pie chart, we can see that the components that I've circled there, the mineral fraction and the organic fraction, which corresponds to the solid soil particles, right, that we find are plant essential nutrients there. And in the water as well, where we could have our dissolved nutrients. That's another location where we're going to find our plant essential nutrients. So we've also talked about the fact that our soil particles, and especially our clay-sized particles, and our organic matter has a negative charge. So I've just circled a representation of a clay-sized particle, and the little dashed lines along the edges or the ends of the particle represent negative charge, and those negative charges are going to attract positively charged components, and many of those positively charged components are plant essential nutrients, like we could see this Ca2 plus here or the Mg2 plus there. Those are both plant essential nutrient elements. They're symbols for calcium and magnesium, and since they have a positive charge, they're going to be attracted to the negatively charged soil particles, and that prohibits them from leaching or moving with water. So you've seen this mnemonic before, C. Hopkins Cafe, managed by my cousins Clyde, Como, and Nikki. So you know that that mnemonic is used very simply to remember what our plant essential nutrients are, and it's listed by atomic symbol. So we know that all the capital letters there represent a different plant essential nutrient element. And if there's a lowercase letter next to the capital letter, that lowercase letter, like in the case of Fe, that's the symbol for iron. So if we look at them spatially on the periodic table, we know that all the plant essential nutrients are circled in green here, but we also know that there's 4, right, that plants get not from weathering reactions, like in the case of that weathering reaction that we looked at before, but either from the atmosphere or from the decomposition of organic matter. So we got 14, right, that are given to plants from weathering of rocks and minerals, and then the ones that are in blue here, the Cation ones, right, Cation, those ones plants take up from the atmosphere, or in particular in the case of nitrogen right here, plants get that when organic matter, or most plants get that when organic matter decomposes and it's released to the soil environment, and then the plant roots can take it up. So let's talk now about the criteria that must be met in order for any of the 18 plant essential nutrients to be considered essential. So there's 3 criteria that must be met. And the first one is that that nutrient is required for growth and reproduction, so that the plant cannot grow or reproduce without that nutrient. And the example that we're going to look at here, and actually in the subsequent 2 slides, is phosphorus. So phosphorus in the soil exists as a molecule called phosphate, and here you're looking at the DNA molecule, and there's phosphate right there. And if phosphate is not present, you have no DNA. And so if you have no DNA, you have no transfer of genetic information. No transfer of genetic information means no reproduction. But we can also say that any of the plant essential nutrients, all the other 17, right, if they're not present, the plant's not going to be able to grow, it's not going to be able to reproduce. So number two is that if that plant essential nutrient performs a specific function in the plant, and there's no complete substitution of that nutrient for another nutrient. So again, we're looking at the DNA molecule, we're looking at phosphate, there it is right there. And if phosphate was not present and something else substituted for it, let's say sulfur, and sulfur exists as sulfate. So if sulfate tried to fit in the same spot as phosphate, you would have a molecule, but you wouldn't have DNA. So that sulfur cannot substitute for phosphorus, and that's true for any of the plant essential nutrients. They all perform a specific function in the plant, and you can't substitute one for another. If any one of those is missing, the plant will surely die. So the third one is that it has a direct action in plant metabolism, and all that means is that each plant essential nutrient element is required for the generation of energy in new cells in the plant. So here we're looking at the ATP molecule. Some of you may have heard about it in other classes. You know that for living systems, it's sort of the way that energy is generated and transferred in a living system. And I've circled phosphorus again because that's the example that we're looking at. If there's no phosphorus, there's no plant metabolism. But the same, again, would be true for any of the plant essential nutrients that we've talked about. If they're not there, there's no plant metabolism, and therefore there's no plant. So, shifting gears now just a little bit. But before we do that, let me just sort of share a little fun fact for you. You may need it for the quiz. Did you know where mocha was first discovered? Yemen, the country of Yemen. Interesting. So anyway, back to this information. So this table lists all the plant essential nutrients. On the left, their symbol and their name, and then in the middle column, it talks about the form that they exist in the soil environment. Also, that same form is the one that plants will take up that nutrient as. So, our plant essential nutrients exist in three forms. And one is a neutral form. And so here, we're looking at carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is neutral, which means it's got no charge associated with it. And that's how plants get their carbon. Another form that plants are going to take up our nutrients as is as an anion. And so here we're looking at NO3 minus. That's called nitrate. And one way that plants get nitrogen is via this form right here, which is called an anion. So that's anionic nitrate. You can see other examples like here. Plants get phosphorus from phosphate, H2PO4 minus, or HPO4 2 minus. But the main point here is that they have a negative charge associated with them. They're called anions. So the third form is as a positively charged component or a positively charged substance, and that's called a cation. So here we got potassium. Potassium is a good example of a cation. When plants get potassium out of the soil, it exists as K+, or as a cation. Calcium is another example of a cationic plant essential nutrient. Magnesium is as well here. So those are the three forms. They're either going to be neutral, they're either going to be negatively charged or anions, or positively charged or cations. So we can use the periodic table now to sort of spatially identify where our cations, anions, and neutral molecules are. So, neutral molecules. So on the left of the periodic table, you can see that any of the elements that we find, or the plant essential nutrients that we find in the first column, have a +1 charge. They're cations. Any of the ones that we find in the second column are also cations, and they have a 2+ charge. And then these in the middle, right, those 6 right there, those are also cations, and they have a 2+ charge on them. And all the other ones, right, either are negatively charged or they're neutral. So using the periodic table, right, we can admire it for the elegant way in which our elements are organized based upon, periodic principles. We can see that there's kind of a system that we can use to remember or figure out which ones are cations or not, basically.